because that's so much work and more money, and it's stressful trying to find another place, and it's just so annoying. And now I feel like I need to get a new job, and I just got this job and I like it, but it's not paying me nearly what I need. And so now I'm gonna have to go through applying to jobs again, which I did for like a whole year plus until I found this job. So I'm gonna have to go through all that again. It's just not fair.
If you can't afford rent, that's a housing problem. But if you can afford rent and still need a loan to pay for it, that's something completely different. Tonight, I'm talking about something that quietly crossed the line. Rent is now being financed by people. That's right. Buy now, pay later has come to rent financing. Not because people are irresponsible, but because for many people across the country, cash flow is actually breaking. And when the most basic expense in the economy needs a payment plan, that's not innovation. Now, while most people are reacting to the headlines on the Common Sense Show, we are slowing it down and talking about what these headlines actually mean. So today, for this show, we're breaking down the rent crisis, buy now, pay later, right after this ping. All right, so I want to start with what's actually happening right now at this moment. Affirm, if you know Affirm is the whatever. If you've ever checked out at like JetBlue or Amazon or Dick's Sporting Goods or several different major retailers on the internet, you've probably seen at the checkout a little teeny logo that says "Break this payment up into 4 installments." Yeah, that's Affirm. Now, Affirm is piloting a new buy now, pay later product for monthly rent. Imagine that. Your rent, which is $2,300 a month, $3,000 a month, $1,500 a month, whatever it is now going to be acceptable for buy now, pay later through Affirm. Sounds kind of insane, right? But the reality is that it's actually happening. Renters can now split their monthly rent into 2 biweekly payments at 0%. No late fees. But here's the thing. If you miss a payment, it could affect your credit score. Now, granted, cash flow is all about money in, money out, right? In business, I've spoken at length, ad nauseum, about how cash flow is king and how you want to make sure you preserve your cash flow in your business. But in a household, cash flow is even more crucial because, shall we say, things that are higher stake available or at risk if a person doesn't pay the rent. Well, first and foremost, a thing that could be at risk is a person's health. If you have medical bills to pay, obviously we're talking about food, we're talking about electricity. If you don't pay your rent, you're on the street. There's a lot of stuff at stake. And so cash flow is king, no matter where you are or who you are. But the fact that you can break up your late payments into your rent into chunks or payments throughout the month is interesting. But here's the thing. Those late payments, do you really want them to affecting your credit, especially if it's rent? I mean, it could affect your credit anyway if you get to the point where you're evicted, but do you want to purposely put yourself into a position where you're breaking up your rent into 2 payments and you are at risk of having like late payments reported? I actually have an idea about this. I'm going to talk about this at the end of the show today about how you could still kind of do something similar like this to yourself. So how it's being positioned. So here's how Affirm is positioning this new finance option, right? They're saying they're giving you flexibility, aligning your rent with your pay cycle. So like if you get paid biweekly, sometimes you may have started a job with weekly pay and the company has decided to switch their pay periods to biweekly, right? And that happens all the time. Or sometimes you just walk into a biweekly pay period and you have to try to get your rent lined up for when the cash is coming in. The other thing is they're also saying that this is responsible to align rent payments with when your payroll comes in because it's going to be based off of what actually is presently due. Now, what Affirm did is Affirm, the payment installment company, partnered up with Isusu. I think I said that right. It's ESUSU. Isusu, maybe Isusu, almost like Azuzu, but with an E and an S. And what they do is they report, it's a company that reports your payments, like your regular rent payments, to credit bureaus to help build your credit, your credit profile. If you have a limited one, or if you are someone who wants to try to build your credit framing. So they've partnered up for this program to offer cash flow, liquidity, and to match up pay cycles. So on theory and on paper, it sounds like a good idea, but we're going to test it a little bit. Let's talk about why, though, they decided to do that. What's the backdrop on rent? Well, according to Cushman and Wakefield, one of the largest commercial brokerage firms across the country, national renters are asking renters are just under $1,900 a month. And here's the thing, they also reported that although rent growth slowed, so the amount that's being charged to tenants has slowed, what hasn't slowed or hasn't come back or receded is the actual amount. So after the pandemic, rents accelerated up substantially across the country. And after rents accelerated up, then what happened was that even though the rate of rents rising had, was like substantial, they never retracted back to kind of where they were in the scheme of rents rising up before the pandemic, right? So normally what happens is there's a long runway to rents kind of going up. It paces with inflation, the cost of living. But when everything, including the cost of living, skyrocketed just after COVID and like during COVID, and everything kind of went through the roof, so did the cost of rent. But also what happened was, what's happened like to hold rent there is that the supply of rental housing is far outpaced by the demand. There is so much demand right now for rental housing that the supply of rental housing has shrunk, which means that if demand is holding firm and the supply is going down, that the leverage of how much to charge rent is always going to be with the person who's actually renting out the space, right? So when demand is high, this is basic economics. When demand is high and supply is low, it means that the supplier has the advantage in that relationship. And in that economic relationship, the supplier, of course, is the landlord. So there is really no incentive for a landlord to bring the rent down when he can essentially always bring another person to replace you at home, right? So you really have to think about what's happening with that too, right? So is it anytime soon, is there going to be a case where the supply of housing is going to increase so far that it suppresses rent? The answer is probably not likely, right? Because already I think the US was on pace to need millions of more units by like 2035. And this was like 5 years ago, right? So like now we're talking about there being very little supply, increased demand, builders building as fast as possible, and there still is a need for even higher supply. Why? Because the population count changes all the time. So here you have these rents that are not budging. There's no demand to bring the rent price down, and people are having to deal with this. Now, the cost of renting is high. The wages that people are earning right now are not necessarily all that high either, depending on who you are. The average salary in the U.S. is $55,000. This is not about rent coming down. This is about rent staying high, staying sticky, and not going anywhere. So that's kind of where we are. That is the soup, the stew that's created this, shall we say, I don't know, solution of Affirm and Isusu coming in and teaming up and providing some of this cash flow relief. Now, why does this matter? Let's talk about that for a minute. This matters because, rent used to be a non-negotiable, paid first, monthly fixed expense, and technically it is still, but that's kind of where it was. That's the premise of what rent actually was. And now it's being financially engineered. So now having these buy now, pay later things turns rent into something else entirely, especially given the fact that your late rent payments can be reported to the credit bureau. Now we're talking about how do we finance something that we're essentially already financing, right? So theoretically, when you enter in a 12-month lease and you can't break that lease, and let's just for the sake of easy numbers, your rent is $1,000 a month, your obligation to the landlord is for $12,000, right? 12 months of the year. And so the $12,000 that you pay for rent broken up into monthly $1,000 payments, that right there is literally what you owe the landlord for staying in the property. Now, what's happening is that $1,000 is being financed. So already, when you are paying the $1,000 a month, you're already financing it. Now we're essentially financing the finance. Although, of course, the landlord is not charging you interest, although they can charge you interest on late payments for the amount that's late within the confines of the state law and the limits that the state has set. But when the necessity, like paying your rents, move into innovation like this, you got to think about something, right? From the lens of a company coming in and to innovate, having to pay rent so that people can afford to pay rent on a regular basis. It, on the surface level, it seems like innovation, but really, from my perspective, it's not. Is it innovation to some level? Yeah, but it's really a response or reaction or red flag, signaling that something else is going on, signaling that something else is happening. It's an adaptation to stress. And what's the stress? Well, the stress are that people are having a hard time keeping up with their regular, normal payments, rent, as well as everything else. And so I was taking a look at some videos and what people were talking about online because, of course, there's no better place to go to find videos than TikTok, of course. But, people are very concerned with the fact that they are not going to be able to pay rent and what it means and what it costs and what does it mean for their jobs and their careers. I mean, just look at this video right here from this woman. I mean, this is fascinating stuff.
Have landlords lost their minds? My roommate moved out a few months ago, so I currently live in a 2-bed, 2-bath by myself. And the price that I am paying for rent for a 2-bed, 2-bath with 2 parking spaces is the same amount of money I would be paying for a studio in Los Angeles, California. I feel like our whole perspective is warped because I hear people talking about, oh, I found a studio for $2,000. What a good deal. I just can't even process what is happening with rent costs in LA and also around the whole country. How is anybody affording rent?
I think the point is that people are not affording rent, right? There's an issue with the fact that you have now companies coming out trying to finance rent, is that people are having a legitimately hard time actually affording it. And they're trying to find solutions to the fact that they can't afford it. So what has to be true? Like, think about this critically, right? So what has to be true in order for programs to exist that actually offer to split your rent payments into further payments during the month? Well, first, the person's emergency savings have to be gone. They can't exist. Second, there has to be perhaps some either under-incomed, under-earning individuals who are working, or there's some kind of income volatility. Now, some income volatility is normal, but I wonder, and I don't want to go too deep with this because we don't have time on this video, but think about this. So I'm hiring for a couple positions in one of the companies I'm running, right? I've seen so many resumes where people stay at these jobs for 6 months to a year. 6 months to a year. Back in the day, people stay for decades at their job and never left. Now people stay for like a year, maybe a year and a half tops. The problem is when you do the whole, year and a half to go get more money, hop around, no loyalty thing. Companies often don't show loyalty to you. Now, I get it. From the other side, people are going to say that there's companies don't show loyalty to people when they're actually hiring anyway, right? So a lot of people claim that people don't, workers don't get loyalty shown from them company because of things like layoffs. True, that happens. But laying off a company is not about loyalty. Laying off workers is not about loyalty. Laying off workers is more about finances. And oftentimes the employees get caught up in the finances. And sometimes it has to do with the company's poor planning, right? So sometimes a company will overhire for positions. They will bring in they will have a bad strategy, bad quarter, and they're forced to start laying people off. That's a problem. It is. Right. So that kind of makes their operation brittle, thus making their finances brittle. And then it ends up breaking with layoffs. The other thing too is pay cycles don't match obligations. So if you get paid every 2 weeks, bi-monthly, and your rent is due on the 1st, and you're kind of caught in this, you get paid one pay period straddling the first week of the month, like the last week of the previous month and then the second week of the next month. I get it. If you're not a great budgeter, what ends up happening is you end up straddling the line of how am I have to pay all these bills because I only have 2 paychecks a month to pay these bills, but I have to manage it correctly. Now, the most obvious thing to do there is to pay your rent in advance when you have the money that comes in. But, things happen. Budgeting happens. And it only really takes one emergency if you get paid bi-weekly to kind of knock you off track in order for you to catch up. And it could be a while for you to catch up. It's kind of like, if I'm going to, create a metaphor for this, it's like the public transportation. Let's say the bus comes and runs and you get on the bus at 6 a.m., right? And it takes you, if you catch the bus at 6 a.m., you'll get into work. Let's say you're only 45, you're an hour away. So you leave at your house at 6, you catch the 6:05 bus, you get to work at 7. However, in some cases, because of traffic and the increase in traffic at a certain time, you leave your house at 6:05 one day because you slept in. You catch the 6:15 bus, like just 10 minutes later, and then you can end up getting to work at 7:30, right? So one little change sometimes can throw the entire pattern of what you do off. And so in the case of paying rent, what could happen is you have a major bill that you weren't expecting. Your car breaks, get a flat tire, you have a medical expense for your kid. You end up needing to pay something for someone that you didn't realize. There's a bill that you incurred that you forgot about, and it comes up. And they automatically take that money out of your account because you made a payment arrangement that you forgot about like 6 months ago, and now it's just coming out. And now your rent is due next week. So what happens there? The issue with that is, frankly, is that you end up with behind the 8 ball, and it takes a few pay cycles to catch up, and you only have 2 a month. So I can see how people can get behind in their rent, right? That's kind of how it works. So yeah, so pay cycles not matching obligations and liquidity or cash flow flowing out is a big problem. But here's another issue that I've seen come up, which is that landlords have dramatically increased, in some cases, their rent. Right? Let me just if I can make this bigger. This might be the biggest I can make it, but let's see. Oh, okay, it's not bad. Maybe I'll put me down here so you can take a look at it. Okay, here it is. So check this out. So I went to Reddit, of course, because you run to Reddit whenever you have questions about real life. And now this Reddit thread talks about how much percentage or dollar amount has your rent increased in the greater Boston area. Now, granted, I live in the greater Boston area. And so for me, this is, real life. This is kind of locale. This is where I am living. And I just wanted to get some perspective in the area. So let's take a look at what people have said and how they comment on this. This was just 6 months ago So this is recent. This is not some 3-year-old thread. This is 6 months ago. Okay. Someone said, looking at rents, but I'm hearing some crazy stories where they jack up the rent for a current tenant before renewing their lease after the first year is up. So I want to know, for those who rent, how much your rent has gone up upon renewing your lease. Am I better off renting a condo from either a person or a smaller company as opposed to a property management company? So let's see. This person said they were paying $1,450 in 2018. $2,600 in the same apartment now. They've been raising it $300 a year for the last 2 years. So that is a $1,150 increase in that person's rent over, well, this is 2018. That was 6 months ago, which makes us 8 years. You know, I mean, it's a big increase. I don't think it's crazy. But I've heard crazier stories. One person says, when I was looking for a 1-bedroom apartment in 2020, the 1 bedrooms were about $1,600 to $1,800. I couldn't afford that, so I got a studio at about $1,300. Now, all the 1 beds in that area are $2,400 to $2,600. Rents have increased so much in the Quincy area. My current apartment, I signed the lease in 2023 for $2,175. Now it's like $2,450. This is a managed building, so that's kind of the cold hard truth of what's going on according to this person's circumstance. Another person said, I got an amazing North End apartment with an elevator, central air, balcony. By the way, the North End is lovely. Little Italy, best Italian in the area. It's really good. A lot of Italian immigrants in that area. You get great food, great pasta. Okay. So the person said, elevator, central air, balcony, washer and dryer, $2,200 in February 2021. My landlord wanted to raise it to $2,400 in August 2022. So just a year and some change later. And then he said, I think he charged the tenant after me $2,600. And he said, gosh, I missed that place. Actually, he edited it later and came back and said he's now charging $2,800. So from 2021 to 2026, he went from up $600. It's a big increase. Okay, person said, I looked at rates for my old 1-bedroom, 1-bath apartment in Hopkinton that I rented in 2017 for $1,450 a month. It now goes for $2,650. So 2017 is almost a decade ago at this point. And so you're looking at $1,200 over a decade. So, well, just under a decade. So maybe a couple $100 a year, maybe a little less. You know, I can see why the people are saying in that area why it's kind of crazy to charge that month, but that is a significant increase over that time. That's for sure. One person said, I have a 2-bed, 2-bath condo rental in Quincy on the T. The T in this area, by the way, is the transit system for $1,475 in 2014. Now 1 bedroom, 1 bath in Dedham, $2,770, which includes parking for 1 vehicle. That's crazy. So one person says $1,600 6 years ago to $1,900 in 2025 for my wife and I. 1,000 square foot, 2-story of a house. Landlord lives downstairs and a family home for her. So $1,900 from $1,600 6 years ago. That's actually not a bad increase. I'll be honest with you. That is actually pretty fair. Now let's see if there's anything else here. I'm too lazy to do the percentages for you, but I started at $1,700 and had the following increase over the past 4 years: $25, $50, $50, $50. Expecting another $50 increase this year, which is fine as long as I get my merit increase at work. Another person said, I rented from 2 different landlord companies, and one of them increased $400 each year that I split with another roommate. Fenway area, I stayed for 3 years until it was completely out of my price range. And then another company increased by $300 that I split with 2 other roommates. Brookline stayed for 1 year. I say this is my biggest complaint about living in Boston. You find an apartment with the rent that is already pushing it in terms of what you want to spend, and then you either have to incur moving costs the following year or pay another $100 or $200 a month in rent if you want to stay. That's true. Moving is actually a very expensive endeavor. So $1,250 a new in for the last 3 years. Landlord lives on the second floor. That's a sweet rent. Here's what I'll say about these things, especially if you live in the Boston area. I'll give you some local flavor for a second, right? The taxes in Boston, the mayor of Boston has already announced an increase in taxes in Boston that's coming up. Part of this has to do with the fact that commercial property taxes have gone down. So the landlords of commercial properties are not contributing as much in tax base as they were previously. Part of that has to do with the fact that the value of commercial property has been depressed from the fact that office space has been wiped out now across the city due to COVID and people working now remotely. A lot of offices have closed. They can't get them rented. The values have plummeted. It's like a ghost town, which is now why there's a big incentive for cities to try to offer incentives for landlords and developers to come and create mixed use spaces where they convert a lot of these commercial spaces into residential buildings with commercial space later, right? So that's kind of a lot of what's happening right now. So let's jump back into what the government is doing about this kind of buy now, pay later thing. The CFPB, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, is monitoring, they said, the buy now, pay later rent option closely. They monitor buy now, pay later programs anyway because they can be predatory if they get out of control. It says key data from the CFPB BNPL market report says that late fees assessed on just over 4% of BNPL loans. So 96% of these loans, buy now, pay later, get paid on time, and just over 4% of them do not. Missed payments still affects credit access. Buy now, pay later often stacks across multiple obligations. And there's consumer advocates that have concerns about this buy now, pay later rent thing, right? One of them is that the installment rent could crowd out future bills, right? Like let's say if you're kind of spreading out your bills, kind of what we talked about before, you could end up bumping up against other bills that are due, causing a backlog with those and creating chaos. And just because you are spreading out your rent doesn't mean that the stress goes away. It's not necessarily that you're getting rid of it, you're just delaying it. And do we really want to normalize short-term debt just for survival? Is that a thing that we should be celebrating? Do you really want to put somebody potentially in debt or a credit crisis just because they're trying to do something basic like live and pay rent? That to me is one of the most pernicious parts of this, right? So what am I going to be watching on this story? So one of the things I'm going to be watching is, I just want to remind you that some of the suggestions I've given, things I said, this is not advice. I'm not your lawyer. I'm not your financial consultant. I am not your guru. Okay. This is just my perspective as an operator, taking a look at this. Businesses for over 20 years, running businesses. This is kind of the lens I'm using. All right. Here's what I would be paying attention to if I was responsible for the outcomes and I was feeling the stress. Okay. So watch some of these signals. Does buy now, pay later reduce rent evictions, or does it just delay them? So are you kind of just kicking the can down the road? How does it affect evictions? Right? Like, are you really want to buy now, pay later your rent, and you're really going to have to pay the piper when the piper wants to get paid down the road? Or are you basically screwing yourself in the short and long term just to get some relief right now? Here's the other thing. Is there going to end up being buy now, pay later options for rent, utilities, insurance? And we talked about groceries. Remember that I did a show all on buy now, pay later for like DoorDash, right? And at the end of this broadcast, I'll make sure I put that in there so you can see it, right? So make sure you click on that video. It's coming up. And are defaults going to cluster seasonally, right? Does buy now, pay later for your rent, is that going to affect you during the spring, summer? Like, is winter, right? During holiday season, what's going to happen there? And lastly, does this become a prerequisite for qualifying renters? Which it could. Do you have the ability to pay the rent on time in full without needing a buy now, pay later option? Landlords are very skittish when it comes to who they rent to because they want all their money all the time on time. You come in, talk about some buying. Do you offer buy now, pay later? They're going to say, why don't you buy your behind out of here? And I'm going to go find someone who can actually afford this unit. Could affect your qualifications. Who knows? Right? You have to, your ability to pay the rent, whether you're getting subsidized by the government or you have a job and you have to pay, either one of those has to line up to what the landlord's expectation for what they want in renting a unit. So they can reject you for not being able to, or them perceiving that you cannot pay the rent and that you need some kind of option. That is well within their legal right to not have you continue the application, to reject you because they think that you can't afford it. This story isn't about whether a firm is good or bad, this is not what this is about. I'm not criticizing this. It's about what happens when the economy quietly shifts from paying for necessities to financing them. To me, that's the bigger story here. What is really going on with your wallet? People, tell me. I want to hear in the comments. Have you had to struggle to pay your rent in the last year or two? Have you heard of people that have had to struggle to pay their rent in the last year or two? Do you know anyone that you think that would actually go for these buy now, pay laters? What have you been seeing for rent increases in your area? If you have answers to any of those questions, put it in the comments. I want to hear from you. All right. If this helped you think more clearly about what's happening, why it matters, that's the point of the show. I want you to connect with the information that I'm giving you. We're not here to panic. We're here to make sure that we can kind of read the room and act accordingly. All right. That's the goal of this show, is to give you the information, to kind of break it down as much as I can, to help you kind of navigate some of these decisions and things that are happening, and for you to take action based off of what you hear here. So I thank you for tuning in today. Until next time, when you don't go about doing your business, you're going to be doing the business of someone else. Don't forget to let me know in the comments what you're seeing in your neck of the woods. I want to hear about it. And also don't forget to check on that video where I already did a video on buy now, pay later for DoorDash. That's coming up